Hi, everyone, and welcome to the McGuckin Group podcast. We are thrilled to have maybe one of our most favorite partners with us today, MVP Results. And we're going to have a conversation about healthcare. We're going to have a conversation about some of the business challenges in healthcare. And then specifically, we're going to have a conversation about the workforce challenges in healthcare. But before we do that, let me introduce to you my guest, Mike Neal. Mike, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me along. It's the all British podcast, this one. So we have Audrey from north of the border, and as some of you may have guessed, I'm not from Florida originally. So yeah, thanks for inviting me along. Looking forward to this. This is gonna be fun.
Yeah, tell me, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do and why you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? Good question. No, my background, unlike my wonderful team who all have years and years of HR experience, my background is the other side. I come from the C-suite. So have founded a number of organizations, built them into multi-million-dollar companies, um, sold a medical supply company in the UK in 2000 and retired to Florida. And after 3 days of retirement, was bored out my brains and went and bought a manufacturing company based over in Pinellas County and moved that on. And then when I exited that, I got introduced to a thing called the predictive index. And my team will tell you that uh, I drive them crazy with my favorite quote that is, without data, you're just another person with an opinion.
Yeah.
Because I'm totally data driven in my decisions, and you're welcome to your opinions, but please show me some data. So I got introduced to the predictive index, and for the first time realized I had a tool that could give me data about the most critical part of my business, which were the people. Because as a CEO, I had data on everything else. I had P&Ls and I had all sorts of data. I could tell you when machines needed to have their annual maintenance done. I could tell you the metrics on everything, other than those people that went home each night at 5 o'clock. So predictive index gave me that data. And the joke is, you love the company so much you buy it. So I got the chance to found MVP Results with the wonderful Cindy Moran. And we are now a Predictive Index Elite partner. We're one of the top 10 partners in the world. I get the chance to head up a wonderful team of EI experts. But more importantly, we get to work with hundreds and hundreds of clients who get that the most critical part of their business are their people. And we work
Mm.
alongside them to give them the data to help them make good business decisions around how best to utilize that most critical aspect of their company, their people.
Yeah. And we're going to get into predictive index further on in this conversation. And when we get there, I'll talk about how I got introduced to predictive index. But before we go there, I'd love to just take a minute and let's ground ourselves in healthcare, such a huge industry. Mike, what are you seeing as some of the business challenges that executives and leaders are facing in healthcare?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's an industry we work a lot in, from all levels, from the managed healthcare aspects down to the clinics, down to hospitals, down to assisted living facilities, and we lump them all under that healthcare umbrella because they're all suffering from the same thing. They are all suffering from people problems.
Mm, yes, indeed, and we see that as well. And if we rewind a little bit and we think about, you know, why is that? And we think about, well, we came through COVID, the war in the Ukraine, we have other wars, we have mass shootings across the US, and disruptions are really everywhere. And I spent some time with Juliet Kayam, who is she's at Harvard Business School, but she was also an advisor to Obama, and she wrote a book called The Devil Never Sleeps. And really what the book's about is we're not living in a place where we might get one disruption every 2 or 3 years. It's this idea of constant disruption, constant change, and constant things coming from right and left field, and not being ready for it. And what that leads to is workforce implications. Because what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of fatigue. I would say disruption fatigue, transformation fatigue, and people are generally exhausted and wiped out and burnt out in a lot of cases in the healthcare industry, and of course other industries, but that's what we're seeing. But when you dial that into, okay, but what about the workforce implications? And what about the talent implications? That's really where we get juiced up. The work we do at the McGuckin Group is we help organizations grow their business through people and talent. And so I'd love to hear from you, Mike, as you've been navigating this terrain and you've been working with these companies, what do you see as some of the workforce challenges?
Yeah, and at MVP Results, every one of those healthcare companies we work with, it is about retention. It's about holding on to your good people. It's about bringing in the right talent. And then it's about leading them correctly. And I don't think we can underestimate the importance of leaders in this, because to your point, the constant disruptions that we're going through, on a personal level, a very close friend of ours is a nurse, and the horror stories she told us from the front lines of COVID
Yes.
was, I like to think I'm a fairly resilient character, but I was like, wow, I think I would have been burnt out like that. So we went through a lot, but something, and I know it's something McGuckin Group believe in as passionately as we do at MVP Results, helping those leaders lead in those difficult times is so critical.
Yes.
But once again, if you don't give them the data to do that, then we're wondering why we're failing. And it's not just in healthcare, but we see this all over the place. We see people promoted into leadership roles because they're the senior nurse on the ward,
Mm.
or they're the engineer who's been at the team the longest. It really doesn't matter. But we see companies promote people into leadership roles, not give them the tools they need, or the data they need, and then wonder why they fail, which to me
Mm.
is just insanity. So yeah, it's every healthcare company we're talking to is these talent issues, because your other metrics can be fine, but if you don't have the people there, particularly in Florida, we know there's a terrible shortage of nursing.
Mm. Yes. And we're seeing the same thing with our clients. Some of our clients are Johnson and Johnson and Baxter Healthcare and Humana and many, many other clients. And we're seeing the same thing across the board. Um, One of the big challenges is alignment to the strategy, but a close second is talent and leadership, and particular retention. And Mike, you and I had a conversation earlier with the client who said, we can bring all the right people in, but if we can't keep them, goodness, that's money just running out the door. And I love to talk about money and following the money, because I think if you can hook people into, here's the investment, here's the value, here's the data, here's the money, then we get a voice at the table. And one of the things I love about our conversations, Mike, is you always take us back to this. You call it your turnover calculator.
Yeah.
And so, what I'd love you to do for our audience is, what do you mean by a turnover calculator? And take us through an example. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's once again, it's data, data, and data. And too often I have conversations, as I know you do, and I'll be merely talking to a chief human resource officer, or in some cases even a CFO. And and they're moaning, wow, we have ridiculous, I spoke to an organization recently who had, 140% turnover in some of their outreach clinics, which is terrifying. And I was like, but what's that costing you? A lot. I'm like, yeah, but a lot isn't a number. Give me a hard number. I need some data here. So I introduced them to a tool we use all the time, which is a turnover calculator. And there's plenty around. I mean, Google turnover calculator. SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Managers, have one. They're widely available, freely available, but you should know what turnover is costing you. I've actually got one here just in front of me, and this is just for a $60,000 healthcare worker, 60K a year turnover. But it goes through how long did it take them to fill the role? How much did they spend screening candidates for the open role? How much did it cost to onboard that person? How long did it take that individual to ramp up? Because we're kidding ourselves if we believe someone lands in the job on day one and they're at 100%. We know that doesn't happen. So there's a cost there to ramp up. And then how many times did you have to do that with that employee position over the last 12 months? This was for a relatively small clinic on that. We estimated total turnover costs for each of these nursing assistants that left was 18,717. And their annual cost of turnover in this one clinic was $898,000 a year. Now, the CFO went white when I showed him these numbers and said, that can't be right. And I said, well, let's go back through the calculator again. You filled the numbers out, not me. And I was like, wow. And I was like, how many clinics do you have? And he's like, 72 across the country. Okay. So 72 multiplied by just under a million. What's turnover costing you? And he's like, yeah, a lot. And I know we talked about this earlier with this client. That's before we start putting other costs into there, disengaged employees or patient outcomes. If you're going to a clinic and you're seeing a different nursing assistant every time you walk in through the door, you might well be switching to another healthcare provider. So yeah, it's having that hard data, realizing what it costs. Because once you realize that, then I think certainly senior leaders are more motivated to, okay, how do we stop this? As the gentleman earlier described to us, people running in the front door and then running out the back door just as fast.
Indeed, indeed. And as we think about some of our listeners, if you're a CEO and you're a CFO, go and find out what your turnover numbers are. Go and
Please.
ask what it's costing you. If you're a CHRO or a talent leader, work it out and take it to your CEO and your CFO. But here's the next question. So, okay, we've got the numbers, but what do we do about it now? So let's talk about how predictive index works, Mike. And let's talk about if we have listeners and if we have some of our viewers saying, yeah, $8 million is a big number for turnover, but what can I do about it? And tell us how predictive index works.
Once again, it comes down to that data. You know, every healthcare organization I work with has huge amount of data, be it metrics around patients, health outcomes, a whole range of it. I do a lot of work with a very large managed healthcare group who manage Medicare and Medicaid across many of the states. They're a purely data-driven organization, huge amount of data around that. But they don't have data on that critical individual
Mm,
on that. So when it comes to who you should hire, how do you know if someone's behaviorally wired for the role? And if you're making hiring decisions without objective data and defining the behavioral requirements of a role, you might as well just be, well, I think we call it winging it, because if you're not using data to make those hiring decisions, you literally are just rolling the dice each time. So the conversation we had with this healthcare provider earlier was, well, what does good look like? Well, we really don't know. I said, well, wouldn't
yeah.
it be an idea if we did that? So with predictive index, we spoke to this healthcare provider and they said, well, we know who our role models are. We went through and I've still got the notes from the meeting here in front of me. He picked 180 top nurses across the organization was if everyone we hired looked like that, wouldn't that be
Yes.
wonderful? Well, with predictive index, we can do that. We can get each one of them to take a quick 6-minute behavioral assessment. From that, we start getting some data, some strong analytics, because I promise you, and we do this with healthcare companies all the time, when they start to look at who their top performers are, they're going to be collaborative team players. They're going to be able to work at a steady, composed pace, handle everything that's thrown them. You know, we talked about COVID, the pressure that was thrown at nurses then, but they withstood it because they had
Yes.
process and they understood process. They understood there was a correct way to do things. So if once we've run analytics and we've got data and we see a very clear graph that shows us, okay, this is what a good nurse looks like, wouldn't it make sense then to compare our candidates to that?
Mm.
Because if they have the right stuff and they match that job target, we can accurately predict that they're more likely to be successful. And if they're successful in the role and they're naturally wired to work that way, the chances are they're going to stay a lot longer. Now, you put me into that role, I'm not wired that way at all. And you might be able to train me, but I'm just not going to be fulfilled and I'm probably going to mess up a lot. And you're either going to let me go or more likely I'm going to quit. So once again,
And
let's use some science and some data. And wow, what a revolutionary idea, a healthcare company using science, because they use it everywhere else, but they don't use it in their hiring process.
yes, yes. And I we do a lot of work in healthcare, like I've said, but I never really came from the healthcare industry. I came from manufacturing industry, but again, it was this idea of don't come to me with solutions without data. And gosh, I've been using predictive index now for at least 25 years. And the thing that was most appealing is the reliability and the validity, the predictive nature of being able to identify top talent through the interviewing process and through the succession process. But it's available in 52 different languages, and it only takes 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And so what we find is that it can be used at scale. There are other assessment providers, and there's other options available, and sometimes those are reserved for the executive team. But what I love about the work we do with predictive index is the scalability and the ease of use and the ease of interpretation, along with the reliability.
Yeah, and that's so critical. The assessment industry has exploded over the last few years. PI has been around nearly 70 years, and is, a valid, legally and scientifically valid pre-hire assessment that is used across the globe by companies. So not just here in the US, but across Europe, where if you know anything, we both come from obviously Europe originally. Uh, Hiring practices are very different there and very strict. But we are a legally valid pre-hire tool across the globe, and consistently, I'm pleased to say, on G2, consistently voted the number one pre-hire assessment, not by us but by users. G2 is a review site where people who actually use software leave reviews. We're consistently voted number one. And the fact that I think we're running about 38 million assessments now, because to your point, it's scalable, and
Yes.
I remember years ago, there's some other great assessments out there, really good assessment, which is fine when I'm looking to hire a CEO.
Mhm.
For it doesn't matter that the assessment cost $3,000 and took 2 hours to do, which is fine for a CEO. But I've got to fill 45 CNA positions at a hospital. Number one, cost. I don't have that budget to do that. But number two as well, they don't have the time to do that. So to your point, yeah, a quick 6-minute assessment that's still valid, that they can take on their phone, they can take their tablet, they can take however they want, and they can take it in their own language, because let's not kid ourselves, particularly we do a lot of work in South Florida. English may not be someone's first language, which is fine. We're
Yeah.
available in all these different languages. So yeah, you make a tool simple to use, you make it scalable while still keeping it accurate and reliable, then that's really the reason we're so successful.
Yeah. The other reason I love it is certainly valid and very predictable and useful in the hiring process. But we do a lot of work in succession, and we do a lot of work in leadership development. And what I find to be very insightful is that when you live in a world where customization and deep personalization is expected from an employee, this is something that can help you on this journey. You can deeply personalize how you motivate and inspire the people on your team depending on their profile. And when you have that information, it just becomes so much easier.
Exactly. And it was, once again, the conversation we were having earlier today with this healthcare provider was we're seeing two reasons for turnover and disengagement in healthcare. Okay, we're maybe not putting the right people in the role, but then it comes back to what I spoke about. You promote people into leadership roles without giving them the correct tools and then wondering why they fail. And we see this definitely in healthcare. In fact, we've got data from a healthcare provider where we did a lot of work around this. And we found the number one reason people were quitting was their immediate supervisor. So
Yeah.
we were out in the clinics, they were promoting people up into whoever had been there the longest got made head of the team, but we weren't helping them. You know, they could be technically very good at the role they do, but maybe don't have any leadership skills because we've not provided them with that. Predictive index enables us to very quickly give them what we call a cheat sheet. It's one of the tools we use called the management strategy guide. And it really is just a 12 point on how to manage each of their team members. Because too often we have a tendency to manage people how we like to be managed. You know, let's use the golden rule. Well, that's fine if you're the same character as me. You know, I'm fine with big picture and let's move fast and just give me the bullet points. I'll figure it out as I go along. But if you're a different personality who likes to understand, hey, what is the plan? And let's have this mapped out beforehand. And I need to be very clear about what's expected of me. Well, I don't know that unless I have a data like the predictive index that helps me around that and shows me, okay, Julie over here, fine. Don't micromanage her, big picture. Let's move fast. Let's just go for it. But Ben over here likes detail, likes
Yeah.
time, likes to have time to ponder this, doesn't not want to talk everything out, but just likes to absorb the information and then move forward. So if you can just provide even a first level supervisor some data to help them be better leaders, to help them use the platinum rule of managing people how they like to be managed, we've moved the metrics there immensely. You know, and say some of our clients are wonderful and have done really nice job of showing the data around this to really help us on this, which once again is always great because data and data. We had a group of clinics based mainly in Florida, but also in a couple of other states as well, Texas. And on their medical assistants, they took turnover from 80% down to 16% by helping their leaders be better leaders. And it wasn't the CEO we were working with or executive leadership team, it was those frontline supervisors who just by giving them a couple of little tools and helping them, you move the needle dramatically.
Yes, indeed. And one of the things I talk about with our clients is one of the leadership capabilities that's in high demand but low supply is empathy.
Yeah.
Empathy is the ability to walk in someone else's shoes. And imagine if you had scientific data that could help you walk in somebody else's shoes. And I think that, that's one of the reasons that we continue to use predictive index with our clients is it's a scientific way to upskill your empathy capability with science and data.
Yeah, isn't that much nicer than winging it and trying to guess how best to motivate one of my team members when there's a scientific data that actually says, hey, this person, likes private praise, likes time to think things through, really likes to understand the whole roadmap before they set off for the journey.
Yes. And so as we wrap up our conversation, Mike, one of the reasons I wanted us to have this conversation was just to expose our audience to, what can be possible when you leverage data, what can be possible when you leverage science in the human capital space. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your perspective. And for our listeners, you can follow us at www.mcguckingroup.com. And for those interested, we'll certainly connect you back to Mike and continue the conversation. So thank you, Mike.
No, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. So thank you, Audrey.
Hi, everyone.